Good evening, thank you for joining us. It is live, it's Thursday evening, and we're going to be looking at some video tonight, particularly on Nigel Farage, who happened to come by the studio a couple of days ago, unexpectedly, may I say, and it was really a great opportunity to put some questions to him, along with somebody else who'd actually initiated the interview, who was a reporter from Australia. But also, before we start, I would like to introduce you to my co-host, Mark Willits.
Hi, Howard. Good to be here. I love this subject. I sit all day listening to LBC, just Brexit, 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 10 hours a day. So this is right up my street, yeah.
Well, putting them under the table is a good way of describing what Nigel Farage did today in the EU. I want you to have a listen to this, because it's ironic, because somebody who I knew when I was living in Spain, who's a footballer, had moved back to the UK. Won't mention his name, other than he's a dear friend called Dave. And he just WhatsApped me about an hour ago and said, I'm not one for Nigel very much, you know, but he gave the most incredible speech to the EU Parliament. And that's what we're going to start with. We're going to have a look at this, and we want to say thanks to the Son and the Holy Spirit and the Father, of course. Have a look at this.
Well, public opinion, indeed public anger, had a big impact on those votes in the House of Commons yesterday, and with it we've seen a diminution of the risk of a second referendum. For now, the prospect of Article 50 being extended taken off the table. And when I hear speakers, despite the Spellman Amendment, saying today they're worried that the risk of a no deal has increased, you're right, it has. But not because of what happened last night in Westminster, but because of the response, gentlemen, we got from you this afternoon. You know, even when the Prime Minister actually gets a majority behind her, and all right, I accept, she made a dreadful mistake by signing up to the backstop. You summoned her. At 4:15 in the morning, she left Downing Street. She went to meet the ultimatum that you'd set her. She signed up to something that has proved to be a disaster. She signed up to something that no country, unless it had been defeated in war, would have signed up to. We now realise that mistake, and actually, the House of Commons, the country, is overall looking for a deal. But you know something? Before the referendum, no one knew who the European Commission were. That Maoist Barroso was a complete unknown. You guys are now household names. And what we've seen is an appreciation in Britain that unelected bureaucrats in Brussels have been talking down to and humiliating the Prime Minister of our nation, and we don't like it. And even when she comes back, trying to be reasonable, saying let's renegotiate, you're not prepared to give an inch. The reason that a no-deal Brexit's got a little bit closer is because of the sheer language and attitude, not just from the Commission, but from many in the Parliament towards the United Kingdom. I think public opinion will be very, very angry that there is no give today from anybody in Brussels whatsoever. I think many will say we're simply dealing with fanatics who are not prepared to be reasonable and make any sense of compromise. And of course, Theresa May has made compromise after compromise, way too many compromises in my view. So I think we are beginning to think that the public will come to a view that no deal is better than the backstop, and that's a big problem. It's a big problem for all of you who want to get re-elected in a few weeks' time, because no deal means no 39 billion, and your voters will be coughing up the money. No deal means the 100 million bottles of Prosecco we buy every year from Italy will become more expensive, as will 750,000 German cars. So why don't we all prepare sensibly for a no-deal scenario? Why don't we prepare to go to the World Trade Organization, use Article 24, so that we can, after we leave on March the 29th, have a 2-year period of no tariffs, no quotas, no restrictions of any kind, no problems or difficulties with Ireland whatsoever. Brexit will have been delivered. You will have protected for at least 2 years your voters. That, I think, ladies and gentlemen, right now is the only possible constructive way forward.
Hear, hear.
I can't agree any more, Howard. That was rousing, absolutely rousing.
Yes. It is amazing that we haven't had somebody say that before, and it's taken Nigel Farage or a Nigel Farage to actually say what most of us are thinking, whether we're for Brexit or for remaining, because the humiliation of which Brussels has put us through and the way they've talked down to us and more or less stuffed us up with into this corner that we almost facing a no-deal Brexit. And to be honest, I would have him put in the same league as Churchill. When there was a great time of trouble, needed a leader that wasn't going to just play politics, that was Churchill. And where we are today, somebody telling it straight how it is. We're not at war, but we are in words and in the way in which we have to get this deal settled one way or the other. I think it's going to take somebody like Nigel Farage to do it. So thank you, Nigel.
And you know, Howard, you say we're not at war, but spiritually, very few people know this, very few, but Rev TV viewers know this, we are at war. And this, trying to extricate ourselves from the European Union is like someone getting born again. It takes a divine miracle, God-inspired, God-initiated, but it's still, like Jesus said, narrow is the path, few there be that find it. I do believe that this could well be the final world empire that Daniel said.
Oh, definitely.
I really do, unless I've completely lost the plot. And it's the iron and clay, it doesn't mix, it's about to collapse. The Bible says it doesn't last long. And out of this authoritarian, totalitarian, unelected bureaucracy of lunatics, absolute extremists. You know, if you think Howard and I are extremists for believing in creation and Israel, then we don't even start to measure up.
But you've mentioned a very important scripture, and that's Daniel 2, 44, and also other parts of the Nebuchadnezzar dream that Daniel interpreted with the head of gold. Now, let me just explain very briefly. I wasn't the one that was to initiate the interview. I wasn't the one who was to take the lead in that. You'll see me sitting in the guest seat. But I was just invited. Literally, within 2 minutes, I was told that Nigel Farage was going to come into this studio. And then I said, that's fine, okay. But I wasn't expecting to be on the seat. But they asked me to do that, and I sat and listened for a few minutes, and then I got a bit more emboldened and started to ask some questions, which I know a lot of our viewers will appreciate for us to have done that. Revelation TV remains politically unconnected, but obviously we, as individuals, we have our own thoughts, and I think the freedom to do that is still available, is it not? Or are we going to Bedford Prison like John Bunyan? I'm not sure.
Well spotted,
Okay, so let's have a look at this interview. It's 38 minutes long. Mark and I will be here afterwards. Send in your questions or points that you want to raise. Do that throughout, live at revelationtv.com. Also, the SMS number that's on your screen, 07781472847. And it is live on this particular night, Thursday night. And here we go. Let's have a look at this video.
Hi Nigel, thank you very much for joining us today, and Howard from Revelation TV. We're just going to have a little chat on Brexit and the developments that have quickly unfolding, and get your general opinion, if you would like to give us a little insight.
If you look at it, that referendum that we had in 2016 was an extraordinary event. It was a referendum, it was a choice that the political establishment never wanted to give to the British people, but in the end Cameron was forced to. I think the truth of it is, I put so much salt on their tails, they were absolutely terrified of me. The only way of getting rid of the threat of this awful Farage and this UKIP party was to say, let's neutralise the issue, we'll give a referendum. And I think Cameron thought that by doing that, he'd get rid of me and the issue would actually die, because only a small minority of people would be stupid enough to think that we could govern our own country and make our own friends in the world. And of course, the amazing thing was that as soon as he made that, it was 6 years ago, last week, that Cameron made the famous Bloomberg speech, when he said, if I get a majority government, there'll be a referendum. And a funny thing happened. The more people started debating this issue, the more people's eyes were being opened to what the European project really was, and the more it became possible, the horror of horrors, in a referendum we could vote to leave. So I think the level of shock
in the UK establishment was absolutely massive. I think it was massive too in the global establishment. There's a fellow sitting in the White House who firmly believes that he would not have been elected as president of the USA if it hadn't been for Brexit.
Does President Trump acknowledge that, does he?
Oh, very much so.
Yeah, he does.
Oh,
yeah.
very, very much so. Yeah. I mean, that was why during his campaign, I was on stage with him in Mississippi. I was going around for sort of weeks before the election all around America, going around TV studios saying, look, you know, Brexit is the beginning of a big change in global politics. And I think a lot of people that went out and voted for Trump did so because they kind of thought, well, if the Brits can do it, maybe we can do it. I mean, really interesting. But where we are now is we are 2.5 years on from the Brexit vote, and we have a Houses of Parliament who, despite the fact we voted to leave by a very clear margin, despite the fact that a year later, in a general election, both the big parties promised us they would deliver on the result, and despite the fact that 498 MPs voted to trigger Article 50, which made it perfectly clear.
And legal.
Legal in every sense, and 2 years in which to negotiate a settlement or to just leave. And here we are now 60 days away from that date, and they are doing everything they can to stop Brexit, to dilute Brexit, to kick the can down the road, to force a second referendum. And I can't think of any comparison in our democratic history where Parliament is so clearly against the will of the people. It's shocking.
But also, could I just say that, as I'm in the media, don't you think the media is very biased to Remain rather than...
Oh, I think enormously. I mean, it's...
Well, that's got to have fueled the fire with...
It doesn't help. The BBC is extraordinary. You know, everything's despite Brexit. Unemployment figures today were good, despite Brexit. The sun's going to shine tomorrow, despite Brexit. I mean, there is this constant negative narrative. And if you watch TV debate programmes, you know, you will normally see 4 Remainers against 1 Leaver.
Yeah, you do.
That's about what you see.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, Nigel, that I've actually seen recently, probably the last 2 weeks, a little bit more about those who wanted to leave. They've seen more. They did that poll up in Leeds, wasn't it?
Fascinating.
Yeah, that was great.
That was so Sky
Even
News.
those who wanted to remain still said, look, let's just leave and get on with it. That's the way it is.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the Leave vote is now coalescing around the idea of we just go. Whatever terms we can or can't agree, we just go, because that's the only way of honouring the result. Now, Project Fear, of course, is in full cry. I mean, the latest one is they might have to introduce martial law.
That's again...
if we leave with no deal. Well, I'm going to suggest they might have to introduce martial law if we don't leave at all. So angry with millions... No, I'm not encouraging street violence, and in fact, one of the...
absolutely not.
You know,
It's not very British, though.
Well, it's...
French, maybe?
I'm going to say it's what the French do, isn't it? And they're very, very good at it. Although, if you go back through British history, you know, we have had examples. I mean, you know, the poll tax riots in Trafalgar Square were an example where these things can happen. I don't want them to happen. I will say this: if Brexit gets delayed, or if Brexit gets thwarted, I will make sure that people have some democratic choices they can take as opposed to moving towards violence.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, after all, that's what we are, is a democracy, and we're seeing everything but that played out in Parliament, particularly.
Quite extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, we've got the longest continuous running Parliament in the world. All right, the Isle of Man's a bit longer, but you know, and we've got something here that was called the Mother of Parliaments. We were seen to be the nation that developed the whole concept of parliamentary democracy, and yet what's going on now is, you know, governments negotiate and parliaments approve or disapprove. That, for centuries, is how we've conducted ourselves on the world stage.
Started with the Charter of London, didn't it, in 1067?
Absolutely, and all the way through that period of time.
Yes.
You know, and what you've now got, for the first time since 1642, which triggered the English Civil War, we've now got people in Parliament trying to take power away from the executive, trying to take power away from the people, and bringing it to themselves. And I you know, unless this is thwarted, and unless we stop them from doing this, I actually quite fear for where we're going with our democracy. It's almost as if and it's not just here, it's in America as well. It's almost as if the Brexit result, the Trump result, the new Italian government, it's almost as if the globalists are saying these are not legitimate results because the people who voted for it are too stupid to understand the consequences of their action. Now, when you start to get people in senior positions in society actually condemning democracy as a process, that's pretty worrying.
Also undermining the people's intelligence. They seem to associate those who want to leave as being unintelligent, uninformed, and stupid.
We get that impression in Australia, actually. We're sitting back, looking in. They seem to be telling the general public, who's a very, very intelligent society, the British public, that you just don't understand. And that seems to be the common, but we can explain it better as long as you vote to remain.
Actually, I tell you what, though, the more they do that, the more actually the Leave vote galvanises, the stronger they become in this. And I will, on a sort of more optimistic note, I will say this. Whatever happens in the short term, and none of us know how this will play out, are we going to leave on a rotten deal, or is it going to get kicked into the long grass? I mean, they are the two most likely options that I see right now. But I'll tell you something, whatever these politicians try to do to frustrate our will, ultimately we're going to win. Why? Because the genie is out of the bottle. And right across the Western world, people are saying, whoa, hang on, we're all for post-war international cooperation. We're all for friendship. We're all for sensible trade. We're all for reciprocity, peace, all of those things. But what's happened in the name of building this post-world order, with the European Union at the very epicenter of it, is they've built a new form of government where the people with the power aren't elected, can't be removed. It's power without any sense of accountability, and it's all backed up by a handful of giant multinational businesses who get involved with these super civil servants, produce a rule book, a regulatory book that makes it almost impossible for the small man and woman to get into those industries and to compete. And that's what globalisation is.
Are you referring to the, EPA, the rules they're bringing in, as an example? If you want to open up a little restaurant, well, you can't, because you need £200,000 worth of equipment to meet with these regulations. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes. At every,
pushing them out of the market.
At every level, we see this. And the left say, oh, capitalism's failing. We haven't got capitalism. This is global corporatism.
It's crony capitalism, isn't it? That's what it is. I mean, if you look at you could go to the ECB and you could buy European Central Bank, and you could buy bonds at 0.25 of 1%, and you could take them to the US and leverage them and buy US bonds and get a 2.5% return on those same bonds, leverage them 10 times. It's crony capitalism. There is no thought. They're not actually producing anything no more, are they? No,
and it's also very interesting, isn't it, that this model that we've got with these global structures and these massive companies, also, the whole thing's backed up by debt. Now, I mean, what is extraordinary about this is, 2008 was quite a scary moment for the West. I mean, a very scary moment. And all right, we came out the end of it, but, a lot of people suffered for a lot of years. But if you fast forward 10 years to now, the levels of debt are, at all levels, corporate, national, and personal, those levels of debt are far greater now than they were 10 years ago. And it also includes China, because China have decided they want to be like the West. They want to get into massive debt as well. So I do think...
Well, you've got China running at 300% of GDP currently. Based on their figures. You've got Japan, which is running at 250% of GDP. And we're talking about Greece. That was this big problem in Europe. And I think they were running at 176% of GDP. I'm not sure on that exactly.
About right.
Yeah, at that particular time when it's all started to unfold. If you look at it from a global perspective, you've got the global GDP is running at 300%. Which is ridiculous. So you're right.
No, I think there is
scary.
I think
this is without Brexit.
Well, of course, here's the danger, though. The danger is that we get the next economic downturn, and it's coming.
Exactly, because that's my question for you,
it's coming.
Nigel.
It's coming. We know it's coming. And when the next economic downturn happens, we'll be told it's all because of Brexit is all because of Trump, and we must go back to Davos, where the great globalists have their week in the snow, and we must hand all our democratic powers over to these people. And this is the story all the way through.
In particular, the central banks, I would imagine.
Well, the central banks, are, of course, are part of that, but I mean, don't forget the role of the IMF and many of these other institutions as well. But you know, always economics is always used. Economic fear is always used to try and get us to give up our liberties, to give up our freedoms, to give up those things that our grandparents and great-grandparents sacrificed so much to defend. And this is absolutely at the heart of what this is all about. You know, I believe in liberty. I believe the nation-state is the building block that we respect. It's the building block we pay our taxes to. It's the building block that, if necessary, you know, we'll stand up and fight for and defend. And the idea that Mr. Juncker, you know, and a bunch of unelected people in Brussels can design a new flag and say, this is now your identity. I mean, it's just for the birds. It isn't going to happen. It isn't working. And we're seeing this in Italy and France and elsewhere. And this is not some extreme form of xenophobic nationalism, as they paint it out to be.
No.
It is a genuine belief. Just as you always put the interests of your own family first before the people next door, you put the interests of your country first, and you work in a spirit of open cooperation with your neighbours. And I think, actually, what I'm advocating is a return to normality.
Can I come back to it? Because it's interesting, the night of 2016 when the result came through, I was shocked. We were all shocked, because we thought we'd go to bed, we'd lost, as far as wanting to come out of the EU. And when the result came in, and my wife and I woke up in bed about whatever it was, 4 or 5 o'clock.
About 4 o'clock-ish, yeah.
Oh no! Do you know? I nearly swore. A pleasant word, not very rude, but I swore and said, "Do you know what? We're now going to get the blame for all the financial problems that are going to come. They were on their way anyway.
Yes.
Okay. So 2008 is going to repeat itself, sadly, because of the debt and everything else. But this is what has been put forward in the last few weeks, big time in the media, is that the ordinary man in the street, you're going to lose. You're going to lose your jobs. You're financially going to be worse off because of Brexit.
Yes.
Really. When in actual fact, what are the facts that you know of, Nigel, like the IMF and everything else, which the big boys at the top know we're heading for a crash anyway, and they would like to palm that off to the Brexiteers?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've actually had, if you think about it, most countries have had 9 years or so of continuous growth. Ever since that shock, we've seen stock markets rebound in the most extraordinary way, people's pensions looking really quite rosy. And so there's always a cycle, of course, isn't there? And throughout the history of man.
And this month's the longest expansion, isn't it?
It is. So it would be natural to expect downturns to come. I just worry that the reasons that caused the last crash are actually worse now in terms of debt.
They are.
And they are worse. So we are going to get another shock. And yes, they're going to blame, of course.
And through that blame, will they then ask for another referendum in, say, 2 years' time or 3 years' time, when right in the middle of a downturn?
Well, they might do, but the thing is this. There was a question that I asked during the referendum campaign. I said, if this was a referendum for us to vote to join the EU, would we vote to join it? Of course, no.
Right.
Absolutely not.
No.
It shows you the power of... When any referendum is called on any subject, the status quo is the most powerful position, because you have to convince people there's a reason to change the status quo, all of which makes the Brexit victory the more astonishing.
It is.
When I think about it, I look at it. But if in 2 or 3 years' time we're out of the European Union and the referendum is to rejoin,
change the status.
It ain't going to happen.
No, right. That's
all right. I mean, that's really the point, and that's why this battle that we're engaged in right at this moment in time is so fundamental. You know, what happens in the next 60 days is so important.
What about Airbus?
Speaking of the debt, when you brought up the debt, we had, what was the main cause in 2008? It was the collateralised debt.
Subprime mortgage. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Obligations, yeah. So, and now I think it's called naked credit default swaps, isn't it? Yeah. That's the new terminology. And basically what that is I can, as a commercial institution, I can give a loan to a company or another institution, and you can bet on that they won't pay that loan, even though it's got nothing to do with you. You're not providing the loan, you're not receiving the loan, and you can bet on that I won't pay it and pay 1 or 2%. And this is the sort of gambling that's going on in the society with the pension funds and everything else.
Yes, and
so how dare they bring that to Brexit?
Half of these products dreamt up by firms like Goldman Sachs.
Yes, JP Morgan and
who of course
Citibank and
who actually see the European Union as basically the forerunner of global government.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what these people are pushing for. I mean, it's pretty clear who the enemy is, as far as I'm concerned.
And who is that?
Oh, the enemy are these giant multinational businesses who are prepared, in their own short and medium-term financial interests, to basically take down our democratic systems. And of course, they find plenty of willing accomplices, because there are plenty of people who will take these big jobs, take the salaries, take the lifestyle, take the pensions, but they've been rumbled.
It's not a bribe, really.
Yes, of course, but they've been rumbled. I think we, the great public, have begun to understand what's going on here.
Yes, the people are more informed today, ironically, because of media. But on the other hand, you've got what is truth.
Also,
free media.
Also, I was going to say this. Also, now this is important. You know, traditional mainstream media, if you look at television in particular, those numbers are falling every year.
Because
those numbers are falling every year because there are many more ways that we can now access.
Which is great, really, for the general public.
You know, I would never, ever have got off the ground effectively without YouTube.
Yep.
It was my speeches in the European Parliament, my, as I like to call it, my helpful contributions.
They're brilliant.
in the European... But suddenly, I was able to get to a big audience on a regular basis. And who's the king of Twitter? Well, it's Donald Trump, isn't it? So, you know, and even as a supporter, occasionally I sort of have to peer through my fingers at...
We all do. But we have to respect the fact that he is a man who says he's going to do something and do it. And he's a businessman. After all, one of the things I have as a layman is looking at politicians and saying, well, where did you come from? What did you do in life to actually deserve to be where you are? What experience do you have in trying to pay the bills, make ends meet?
Well,
as a business or as an individual.
As I've said to the European Parliament more than once, none of you have ever had a proper job in your lives, and they all start booing me. But I don't think I'm wrong. You know?
No, but that's what we're all seeing, and that's why Donald Trump breaks the mould.
Big time.
And people then, of course, try to attack him for the tax thing, and of course they're doing everything to change people's opinion. You know, then the average man in the street wants now a change, a big-time change, and likes the directness of Donald Trump.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's no messing, you know, exactly what he thinks.
Yeah.
And people like that, you know. I think there is a big... You sort of think back to the earlier part, perhaps, of this century, and we had sort of Blair in the UK, Schroeder in Germany, Clinton in America, and it was this kind of career... politics, everything had kind of merged in the middle. It was a sort of big form of social democracy almost, heading towards increasing powers at a global level throughout the world. And I think we're now actually fighting back against that pretty hard. We actually want some personalities again. We want some real people. And the only victory the other side have had, really, since 2016 was Macron. Yeah. Macron was the golden boy, the globalist, the man who, on his first day as French president, played the European anthem and had the flags all over the stage.
Well, he's down to about 22% in his...
18 was the last I saw. So so the good news is, if that's their fight back, overall, we're in a pretty good position.
Yeah. Do you think now this might be out of your vocabulary, but one world government, a lot of our viewers understand that the world will head towards a one world government and a new world order, whatever you want to call it.
It won't. It isn't going to happen. No. Well, I mean, this is the dream of Trotsky, isn't it? This is what Trotsky wanted 100 years ago, and it isn't practicable. It isn't reasonable. It could never be done on any democratic basis anyway.
It would have to be dictatorship.
Yes, it's not what people want.
Yeah. Well, we can see...
Isn't a vote for Remain a vote for a one-world government?
Well...
if you vote to Remain, yes. Aren't you voting for globalisation?
Most people...
In most cases.
Most people that voted Remain did so because they said to me things like, Nigel, I've got a big mortgage. Nigel, I've got 2 kids at private school. Nigel, I've just started up a new business. And they were the struggling middle classes.
Yep.
On the face of it, they've got very comfortable lives. In reality, they're working their blooming socks off and just about keeping going. And it's on people like that where the status quo argument managed to get Remain to vote for them. If you really look at it, what percentage of the UK actually believe in the United States of Europe, actually believe in this new world order? About 8%.
Yeah.
How did you feel about Obama when he came over and he said pretty much, well, you've got to remain? What to me...
You go to the back of the queue after
How could he say that?
What a way to speak about your best friend of the last 100 years. I mean, it was the tone, it was everything about it. I didn't know at the time how this would go down. It was clearly Cameron's big card, getting Obama over. And it took me 48 hours to work out what the response of it had been. And actually, people were revolted. How dare the American president come here and speak to us like that? So,
especially as he wanted independence in America from the Brits a long time ago.
I love the speech rally when you brought that up, and you wound the crowd up lovely. Yeah.
But it was everybody, wasn't it? It was the entire global order telling us not to vote for Brexit. You know, even countries where you would have thought they'd have supported us, like Australia and Canada, all of them telling us not to vote for Brexit. But we did it, and things will never be the same again.
A couple of other things, from my perspective, I'd like to clear up. One is what has been said about big corporates like Dyson, the things that had been levied at him. He was leaving. That was planned before. He's not leaving the UK. That's where his main business is going to be in China and the Far East.
Well, I wouldn't call Dyson a big corporate. I call him an entrepreneur.
Yeah. Well,
and I think there's a very big difference between the two. Look, 4% of Dyson's sales are in the UK. And let's face it, you know, there is a massive transfer of money, wealth and power going from west to east in the world anyway, so there's no surprises in that.
Yeah. And he wants to start the electric car as well, and that's an investment he's going to make overseas. One other thing, what about Jaguar Land Rover? I know that's something which people would levy against the Brexiteers as well again. That's their fault. But surely it's a change in policy of diesel.
Yes.
And you can't really have those big
There is a
cars.
change in policy for diesel, isn't there? There is.
Well, isn't it amazing? 15 years ago, they all said to us, you must buy diesel cars. Diesel cars are good for the environment, and now they tell us diesel cars are not good for the environment. But the real reason for their problems at Jaguar Land Rover, of course, is that China, you know, there was a burgeoning demand for British-made cars, British-manufactured cars in China, and that has taken a bit of a cooling with what's happening in the Chinese economy. It's got nothing to do with Brexit, and yet, they'll go on television and tell you that a no-deal Brexit would be a disaster.
Yeah.
Just as they did, by the way, over the euro. 20 years ago, we had people like Blair from the Labour Party, Lord Heseltine from the Conservative Party, all the big city companies, big manufacturers saying, if you don't join the euro, we're all leaving the UK. Well, I tell you what, that was one of the wisest things we ever did. And it's the same crowd of people, same people, again, making the same things.
Which has got to make it easy for us to Brexit as well.
Yes, and as I say, I repeat the point. I don't know whether we're going to Brexit on time, whether the can's going to get kicked down the road, whether in the worst case scenario they make us vote again, and that's possible. But I think if they do make us vote again, they'll be very surprised by the result.
Well, 29th of March is my birthday, so I'm hoping...
There you go, Howard.
So where do we go in the future? What would you say to bring some comfort to Brexiteers?
That we are on the winning side here. History shows that false empires never survive. They never last. And this is a false empire that's been built in Brussels. It's got nothing to do with European cooperation. It's about the accretion of power. Tony Blair gave a very, very telling comment. He said the European project used to be about peace, but it's now about power. I'd say to Brexiteers, I know it's desperately frustrating in the short term to see what's going on. But don't worry, folks, the genie's out of the bottle, we're winning, and if we have to take them on again, we'll take them on again and we'll beat them even more heavily.
Nigel, can I ask you just finally just one question in relation to the global debt, that sort of thing? The US dollar. A little bit off the subject, but it's relating to debt now. The US dollar. Where do you see that in sort of 5 years, 10 years? Is it going to be...
Buy dollars, sell euros. Buy dollars, sell euros.
Really? Yeah. You think that's...
That's my trade for the next 5 years.
Is it? That's
I was a broker for many years. I wasn't always right, but I do say it with confidence. No, I think I'm basically bullish dollar.
Okay.
I'm bullish dollar, and I'm pretty bearish for the European economies.
So you'd be bearish on gold, I would imagine, in that case, or not necessarily?
No, not necessarily at all.
Because of the...
No, because I think as and when we do get some shocks through the banking systems, or what could come from Italy, for all we know, I think at some point the price of gold will be a lot higher than it is now.
Yes, yeah.
But you know, the thing with gold is you've got to sit with it. You've got to wait. You've got to be patient. Might take 10 years. Might take whatever. Yeah. But no, I think overall, I mean, pointless being bearish of gold down at these numbers. But I do think I'd much rather be invested in the US dollar than the euro for the next 5 years.
Yeah. I've seen with the Federal Reserve in the US after Trump got elected, now they seem to be... that they've increased the interest rates more often.
He doesn't like it, does he?
No, he doesn't. He doesn't. No.
He doesn't like it.
He calls them out. He calls them out, Nigel. He'll call them out. No one's ever done that. He calls them out and he'll say, look, you know, the only damage to the economy is you guys.
Yeah.
He'll actually say that. It's amazing.
Yeah. The other indicator, of course, that perhaps we are headed for a slightly tougher time is the price of oil.
Yeah, yeah.
That rather dramatic fall in the price of oil. Again,
yeah.
Every picture tells a story, doesn't it?
It does.
Provided you've got your freedom.
Yeah.
Provided you've got your liberty.
Yeah.
What price that? What price freedom?
Exactly.
That's how I feel about this.
No, me too.
You look.
Yeah, me too. I'm concerned for my children.
Even if you lose a little bit right now.
Even if you did.
A couple of years.
And I'm not saying we would. But even if you did, I mean, as Sir Michael Caine said, you know, that he would rather be... You know, he doesn't want to be a rich slave. He'd rather be a poor master. You know? It's quite interesting. But I don't think we put enough value. I don't think we actually explain to our children enough today that the kind of liberties and freedoms that their parents and grandparents have enjoyed, these were hard-won things. You know, and they matter.
Yeah, they do. I was in China recently, actually, and one thing I noticed, which I found very concerning, was they've got the camera system, which London's got. It's facial recognition, and if you go into a shop and you pick up some nappies, then you're considered responsible, and in real time your social points go up and you get the social score, almost like a credit score, I would imagine. If you pick up a bottle of wine, you're considered dependent, and in real time your point score goes down. So what the result of that is, if you get to a certain, below a certain level in points socially, then you can be a multi-millionaire. You can have your credit cards and you can work hard for a living and have enough money to go overseas for that holiday. You're not allowed. You can't book a holiday. So they talk about no borders and that sort of thing, which is great if you've got a private jet. But if the reality of that is what's going on in China at the moment. If you've considered like low on the social scale because not because you're doing anything wrong, because you enjoy a glass of wine or there's something that the state doesn't like, and you lose that scoring, then you don't get to travel overseas. You can't pretty much leave the town. You're a prisoner in your own town. And you know, let's face it, you know, certainly in London, the technology is here. All they've got to do is change the software. You know, really.
We'll make sure it doesn't happen.
Well, that's what we're saying. Yeah, in the freedoms, that's what we're here. Absolutely not. We don't want that to happen at all. So, yeah.
One big problem I think that we're facing is that what do we do about the refugee situation? Because our hearts have got to go out to those that are really suffering and being bombed out of their homes, their businesses, like Syria. And basically, I don't think England did enough for that situation. But what do we do? Because the problems of the world, which I think are going to get worse, England might do very well, but how are we going to cope, not just in the United Kingdom, but across Europe,
I think we need to go back
West? How do we deal with that?
Back to first principles.
Which is?
What is a refugee? What is a refugee? You know, there's actually a very good 1951 definition of a refugee, United Nations definition of a refugee, you know, and it's a person in fear of their life or liberty because of who they are, or what they think or say, all right? So, pretty obvious that when my forebears, who were French Huguenots, you know, being burnt at the stake in France, that's why they came, because this was a country with a bit more religious liberty than France at the time, and similarly with Jewish populations from Russia, from Austria, from Germany, etc. The Idi Amin group that came from Uganda.
Yeah.
Obviously, they were refugees. If you were to apply that principle to those that are displaced, well, according to the UNHCR, there are 61 million displaced people at the moment. I mean, it's just impossible.
Exactly.
It's literally impossible.
So how do we deal with it?
I would say
on
this
a humanitarian and also an ethical, moral ground?
I would say this to you, that very, very few of those who've come across the Mediterranean into Europe are refugees, in the classical definition of what a refugee is. Yep. They may be people looking for a better life, but equally, when you open the door on that scale, you also let some very bad people in too. You know, I said at the start of all of this that when ISIS say they will use the Mediterranean to flood Europe with their operatives, we probably ought to believe them.
And they did.
And they did. So for me, Tony Abbott, who was the Australian PM, got this absolutely right. He said, look, anyone that comes here by boat will not be staying.
Yep.
Whoever you are, you will not be staying if you come illegally to Australia via this route. If we'd done that in the Mediterranean, we'd have saved thousands of lives of people who've been drowning. And you can have offshore centres, you can...
Which is what the Australians done.
You can process some as genuine refugees, but you talk about the humanitarian aspects of this, and I understand that fully. But let's also think about the social aspects of this. You know, there are different communities from different parts of the world, different religions, and for those religions to coexist peacefully doesn't always happen overnight.
Very challenging.
They can be very, very difficult things. And I think if you look at what's happened in cities in Sweden, in cities in Germany,
particularly,
you realise that actually a massive, we've left a huge rift in society, completely different cultural values towards the role of women in society or whatever else it may be. So look, I suppose I've been one of the most hardline voices for the last 4 or 5 years, saying we've got to stop the flow across the Mediterranean, and if we allow it to continue, we will actually, through our compassion, imperil the future of our civilization.
Yep.
I'm thinking from a biblical point of view. I think the scripture actually says, to those who are sojourning, God would say that you're to offer the foreigner help. But they're sojourning. It's just thinking about that. They're passing through. They weren't becoming part of the population completely for the rest of their lives. So, but it is challenging because you've got even the famine situation now in certain parts of the world is going to increase. It is already. We're seeing like the 80s come back in a big way in Africa. But what do? We can't just throw money at it. We can't just find the homes, and I mean, we can't look after our own people, let alone millions of others.
Perhaps we should stop funneling money into foreign aid budgets, many of which end up in the wrong places, much of which gets taken away in corruption. I'm a huge believer that we should help those countries with intermediate technology. We should help those countries by actually, outside the European Union, we can take some of the tariffs off green beans that come in from African countries and all the rest of it. Help people to help themselves, but I do not believe in foreign aid. I'm sorry, I just don't.
It's got to be managed, I think.
Yeah, it's got to be managed.
But
you've got to
you could trust, that's the thing.
The problem with Africa, of course, is how do you
corruption.
How do you get around corrupt government? And that is a huge, massive problem.
Yeah, Australia, I think they had they've got a $5 billion aid budget, and I think the Clinton Foundation was just about to take over that and start to distribute on their behalf until Donald Trump took the presidency over Hillary, which then broke that contract. Otherwise, that would have been speaking of the middle parties where a lot of these fees get chewed up and that sort of thing.
More.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What about now we come out of the EU? What about other countries coming out, like Italy, Greece? Is this what they're really concerned about, and that it's going to just fall apart?
Well, it's a funny one, actually, because somebody I think it was Libération, the French newspaper, somebody wrote that 10 years ago, Nigel Farage was the EU's worst nightmare because he wanted to leave the European Union. Today, Viktor Orban is the EU's worst nightmare because he doesn't want to leave. So it's quite an interesting one, isn't it? Yeah. clearly what you've got coming from Hungary, coming from Italy, are parties of opposition that have now taken over as the mainstream parties. They are intent on changing the way Europe operates.
Yep.
But hey, just last week, Macron and Merkel signed an updated version of the Elysee Treaty.
Yeah.
So
Was that sort of like, you know, finger up to the rest of us?
Oh, it just shows they couldn't give a damn what we think.
That's what I mean.
They couldn't give a damn what we think. And their intent on pushing on with this unified state. And my view is that Italy and Hungary and the others, they might try for 2 or 3 years to reform this, but in the end they'll reach the same conclusion that I reached. That actually this is unreformable, it's the wrong model, and we need to go back to the kind of thinking that we had back in 1948, well, you know, the Council of Europe, somewhere where sovereign countries can go and sit and meet and talk about mutual issues, cross-border problems. I want to do all of that. I'm not anti-European, I never have been. I love Europe. It's a fabulous place. But what I loathe is this attempt in their glass and steel structures in Brussels to try and run all of us.
That's brilliant. Nigel, Howard, what I'm going to do, I'm going to wrap it up. So if you got a final question, that would be great. But yeah, fantastic. Loved your input.
No, with that, just keep,
really
all I can say, keep the faith, everybody. The revolution's still rolling.
Yeah,
And one little scripture I'd like to finish with. In fact, it's going to be part of a bus campaign coming out on February the 11th. You can edit this out if you want to. But it's a scripture that Christ said, "A kingdom divided against itself will fall." And on the other side of the bus, I've got let your yes mean yes and your no mean no. And that got approved both by TfL and also for the Advertising Standards Agency. I was surprised, but it's coming out on February the 11th. Try and get in front of one of those buses, the right side.
That'll get some publicity.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Nigel.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you,
Nigel,
Christopher.
thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Cheers.
Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you. Great. Cheers, Howard. Thanks. Great.
No matter what, in the end of days, the God of heaven will set up his kingdom, which will remain forever.